I blinked back tears while reading this on a public train. This book was just, pun intended, out of this world. Hi everyone, it's Kai Xin, and I read 8 books in January 2022. Some of them were terrible, some of them were good, and one of them was out of this world. If you want to find out which book that was, keep watching all the way to the end of this video to find out. First off, let's start off with a poetry book, Magnolia, 𝙒𝙗𝙈𝙀𝙎𝙀𝙁 by Nina Powles, which was the very first book that I read in 2022. It's a beautiful poetry collection, and the title of the book, Magnolia, refers to the magnolia flower, also known as Mulan in Chinese. You may recognize the name from the Chinese heroine Hua Mulan, which is also the protagonist of the Disney films that made the tale so popular in the West. This anthology by Mingya Powles also opens and closes with poems inspired by Mulan, which I think is both clever and an apt symbol of Nina's own identity and cultural heritage as a Chinese-Malaysian woman who grew up in New Zealand at a crossroad of the East and West. As a Chinese-Singaporean woman myself, there are parallels that I see and sense in Nina's works, and therefore I feel like this curious sense of affinity with her and her writing. And my favourite line in the book comes from the poem Colour Fragments. It is like being inside clouds in perpetual dusk. It is like being inside a Roscoe painting. It's almost like she's painting inside your mind with her words, and you see the clouds bloom before your eyes as you read. Magnolia was an almost 5 stars for me, but I ultimately gave it only 4 out of 5 stars. Next, let's move on to the fiction books. The second book that I read was How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. Some of you may have heard of this book because Hayao Miyazaki, the animator and director of Studio Ghibli, announced that he was going to come out of retirement to make this his one last final film. According to Miyazaki, the novel was his favourite childhood book, and he wanted to make it for his grandson. As a huge Studio Ghibli fan, of course I had to give this book a read. The book is a coming-of-age novel about a 15-year-old boy named Copper. It reads like a really wholesome children's book, but it's simple yet complex at the same time. What I liked most about the book was how it simultaneously has the smallest, simplest of things, like making friends or making tofu, but also touches on deep themes like science, morality, philosophy, and human nature. 3 things that I learned from this book are: 1. Bravery is the courage to own up to your mistakes and not run away. 2. It's the arrogance of human nature to think of ourselves as the center of the universe. And 3. Seek to make discoveries that are truly useful to humanity and worthy of respect from all. Well, in spite of how meaningful I thought the book was, I only gave How Do You Live 3.5 out of 5 stars. But before you come at me, let me explain. I'm not usually a huge fan of children's books, and I'm quite strict in the ratings that I give. In fact, I know that there are a lot of adults who like children's books like The Little Prince, but I really dislike that book. If we were to compare 2 of these books, which are kind of like children's books with deep meanings for adults, I personally think that How Do You Live is like a much better version of The Little Prince because it's more grounded in reality and heartwarming. Now, moving on to the third book that I read, which was Recursion by Blake Crouch. It's a sci-fi novel centered around 2 protagonists, a cop named Barry who is investigating this strange phenomenon called false memory syndrome, where people suddenly remember memories of a life that they never lived, as well as the neuroscientist Helena, who built a technology to allow people to map their memories and re-experience their lives. It's a really cool premise that deals with ideas of time, the fragility of memory, alternate universes, and alternate timelines. And Blake Crouch actually has really good writing, and the prose is sprinkled with beautiful turns of phrases, which is unlike most of the other sci-fi books that I've read, where the writing and language usually takes a backseat to the actual sciencey part. I quite enjoyed this book, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, we come to the 4th book that I read in 2022, and also the last fiction novel on my list, and this was Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. It's set in a post-apartheid South Africa where a 52-year-old literature professor named David begins a sexual relationship with one of his students and loses his job. A little bit of a spoiler alert and trigger warning here, but David then goes to Cape Town to live with his daughter Lucy, who gets raped. To be honest, this is a little bit out of my comfort zone because I honestly wouldn't have read the book based on its description. But I kind of had to read this because it's one of the compulsory texts that I'm studying for the Introduction to English Literature mod that I'm taking this semester. But I think the beauty of the story is how it makes you question everything, like justice, fairness and unfairness, morality, redemption, racism, discrimination, sexual assault, and so much more. So, Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, I initially gave it a 3 out of 5 stars after I read it because it's still not really my type of novel, but I can still appreciate its intricacy. And I suspect after analysing and discussing it more in literature class, I may come to like this book more. But yeah, for now, 3 out of 5 stars. We now go to the non-fiction books. And in ascending order of how much I like them, the first one was The Practice, Shipping Creative Work by Seth Godin. Now, Seth Godin is a great marketer. He has done a fantastic job building up his blog as well as his personal brand. However, he may be a good blogger, but not a good author. The first thing I thought when I was writing a review was, this book would really have been better as a blog post. The book isn't bad, it does have some pithy quotes and actually half-decent tips and advice. But all that is buried under 256 pages of horribly repetitive writing. It's not that the book is bad. I really like this quote, which I think nicely summarized the book in one line. Shipping because it doesn't count if you don't share it. And I did learn a couple of things from the book, of which 3 were: 1. Commit to consistently practicing every day. 2. You don't have to be omnipotent, you just need to be very good at one thing. And 3. Just ship it. So all in all, I rated The Practice, Shipping Creative Work by Seth Godin 0.5 out of 5 stars. Honestly, he could have saved everyone some time, money, paper, and suffering if he just condensed everything down in this book into a single blog post. The 6th book that I read was Vanderbilt by Anderson Cooper and Katherine Howe. I honestly don't know why I read this book. I've never really had any interest in knowing about the Vanderbilt family. This is a book chronicling the rise and fall of the Vanderbilt family, told by author and journalist Anderson Cooper, who is also the son of Laura Vanderbilt, and historian journalist Katherine Howe. My favorite quote from this book, ironically, wasn't written by the authors, but by Mark Twain. It isn't what a man has that constitutes wealth. No, it is to be satisfied with what one has that is wealth. The book was competently but not amazingly written, and for a book that has so many fascinating characters, conflicts, and stories, it was actually quite boring and difficult to get through. So I rated Vanderbilt by Anderson Cooper and Katherine Howe 0.5 out of 5 stars. The 7th book that I read was Tastes Like War by Grace M. Cho, who's an associate professor of sociology and the daughter of a white American merchant marine and a Korean bar hostess who grew up in Japan amidst the war. I blinked back tears while reading this on a public train. The blurb of the book describes itself as part food memoir and part sociological investigation, and I thought it was a really nice way for the author to weave her own family and mother's story, her Korean-American identity and culture, together with her own academic explorations into the history, politics, and social implications of war, racial discrimination, and the stigmatization of mental health. 2 things that I learned from this book were: 1. Mental health is a social disease that cannot be cured by medicine alone. And 2. Sometimes the best thing that you can do for a person is to treat them with love. I found this book incredibly moving and poignant, but to be honest, for a book that's titled Tastes Like War, I actually expected it to be more intertwined with food and cuisine. There are mentions of food peppered throughout Tastes Like War, but I would say it's less on the taste and more on the war. Like, I definitely learned more about the Korean War than about the actual food or cuisine itself. But that's okay because I think that's the point of the book. It's about food, but it's also more than just food. And so all in all, I gave Tastes Like War by Grace M. Cho 3.5 out of 5 stars. Last but definitely not least, the 8th and last book I read in January 2022, and my favourite book of all of them, was An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield. Chris Hadfield was a former engineer, fighter jet pilot, colonel, and astronaut, but his writing is just as good, if not better, than authors who write for a living. The entire book is written in such riveting prose, clear, understandable, and approachable, yet brimming with personality, humour, intellect, wisdom, and gorgeous descriptions of space. Let me read to you one of my favourite parts of the book, which appears literally on the first page in the introduction, and it's just so beautiful. The windows of a spaceship casually frame miracles. Every 92 minutes, another sunrise. A layer cake that starts with orange, then a thick wedge of blue, then the richest, darkest icing decorated with stars. The secret patterns of our planet are revealed. Mountains bump up rudely from orderly plains. Forests are green gashes edged with snow. Rivers glint in the sunlight, twisting and turning like silvery worms. Continents lay themselves out whole, surrounded by islands sprinkled across the sea like delicate shards of eggshells. It was just a fascinating and fantastic read on what it's like to be an astronaut, and also a guide for how to live, not just in space, but also on Earth. 3 things that I learned from the book was: 1. Be prepared, even if it might not happen. 2. Happiness comes not just from big successes, but also the small, everyday moments. And 3. Work towards your dream in a way that even if you fail, you still succeed. And my favorite quote from the book was, life on Earth is, in 2 important respects, not at all unworldly. You can choose to focus on the surprises and pleasures, or the frustrations. And you can choose to appreciate the smallest scraps of experience, the everyday moments, or to value only the grandest, most stirring ones. Ultimately, the real question is whether you want to be happy. This book was just, pun intended, out of this world. It's one of the best non-fiction books that I've read, and it definitely made its way into my list of favourite books of all time. And for that, I gave An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield 5 out of 5 stars. Now, wrapping up, which were my favourites and not so favourite books of January 2022? For my favourites, I would recommend you 3 books. First, Magnolia Mulan by Mingya Powles. 4 out of 5 stars. Read this if you're looking for poignant, stunning poetry. Second, How Do You Live by Genzaburo, Yoshino. 3.5 out of 5 stars. Read this if you're looking for a more wholesome, heartwarming alternative to The Little Prince, or if you're a Studio Ghibli fan like me before the movie comes out. And of course, 3, Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield. 5 out of 5 stars. Read this if you've ever wondered how it's like to live as an astronaut in space. But also read this if you just want to read one of the best non-fiction books I've ever read on life, character, and everything else. For my least favourites, it's kind of a tie between The Practice Shipping Creative Work by Seth, which I gave 0.5 out of 5 stars, and Vanderbilt by Anderson Cooper and Katherine Howe, which I also rated 0.5 out of 5 stars. I can summarize them for you in 2 sentences. The Practice is about shipping your work, and Vanderbilt is about how the once richest family of America squandered their wealth. These 2 books weren't all that bad, to be honest. Perhaps I'm being a little overly critical, but I don't think they were engaging or enjoyable enough to be worth your time reading and to merit their length. So that's all for my book review for January 2022, and thank you so much for staying all the way to the end of the video. I really appreciate it so much. Comment and tell me what's the best book that you've read this month, and subscribe if you'd like to see more book related content. Bye!